Hello everybody, and finally welcome to the second part of my Panzer Call to 1939 DLC overview, and let me just start with a couple of notes about the second half of the campaign. Right after Bzura, we are presented with the first and effectively only fork in this DLC, which is the choice between Modlin and Lwów. I found neither of the branches to be particularly difficult, even during my Generalissimus default core force playthrough, except that there is a little trick to playing Modlin that you need to be aware of. That said, you're then sent to Warsaw, which is the centerpiece of this part of the campaign, actually arguably the centerpiece of the entire DLC. After Warsaw, you may choose to go to Finland or skip directly to Denmark, even though I don't know why you should skip a part of the DLC unless you hated it, in which case, why are you here? Anywho, I need to point out that for my main playthrough of the second part of the DLC, which I got all the footage from for this video, I had to increase the difficulty from General to Field Marshal because I found it to be too easy to play with the imported core, and I was concerned that my experiences would not reflect the actual difficulty of the DLC. There's still my Generalissimus playthrough with the default core, which I have successfully completed, but we'll talk about this at the end of this video when I discuss the conclusions and my opinions of the 1939 DLC. And now, let's get to the missions, shall we? Welcome back to the world of small maps and an inevitable loss in core slots. Welcome to Lwów, ladies and gentlemen. Here's your free complimentary no strings attached deluxe armored train. It's a weird beast, but I quite enjoy it. Imagine a 105mm artillery gun that has better defenses than your tanks but doesn't support other units. It's incredibly fast, but it's a train and it's restricted to railways. In any case, it's an interesting piece, but it might take some creativity to adapt it into your core. The mission itself is rather easy, just attack straight to Lubachov, expect some resistance and counterattacks as soon as you reach it. About 3 enemy fighters will show up thereabouts as well, so make sure you're prepared for them. Once the counterattack is dealt with, the road towards Lwów is completely clear, so advance carefully towards it, and if you so desire, pick up some of the additional flags on the road. I said carefully because the Poles have some mobile reserves at the bottom right corner of the map, and they will use them. Expect some tank and cavalry resistance there. The briefing also blabs about all of those trucks and trains going through Rzeszów and how you should go ahead and destroy all of them. You are really not required to. Go south only if you want to capture those flags in the southwestern part of the map, and if you want to give a unit or two some experience from all the trucks and trains. Otherwise, they don't give you any bonuses. In the Whatever mission, the Pincer pivots north as we deploy our forces in the newly conquered Lubachov. This scenario is reasonably straightforward as well, despite some Polish fortifications, and haven't the Soviets decided to join in on the party? The briefing will tell you not to cross the Bug River, and unless you want to capture Soviet equipment, which you will not be punished for, simply don't cross the river. Otherwise, split your forces more or less evenly between Zamość and Mircha, and once you're done with them, converge on Lublin. There's no need to cover the river. Even if the Soviets cross it, they will not penetrate deeper into the western bank. There is some Polish infantry and artillery in the hills between the two towns, but they're static and clueless, and you don't really need the road they're guarding, so just bypass them. Take the airport though. On higher difficulty levels, you might experience enemy counterattacks south of Włodawa, so be careful there. And once Lublin falls, advance towards Włodawa only along the upper edge of the map. There are completely ahistorical Soviet Katyushas positioned on the hills across the river, and they will bombard your guys if you get too close. So that easternmost objective in Włodawa should go last. The siege of Warsaw comes right after the scenario, and this is where you will be offered to spend 75% of your prestige for 14 command points, and let me tell you that you should do that if you can afford it. But first, let's look at the northern pincer of the campaign. I'm betting the word Modlin causes nasty flashbacks in all the veterans of Panzer Corps 1 because of the eponymous and pretty difficult mission in the 1939 Grand Campaign DLC. In Panzer Corps 2, we're starting with the same conditions as in Lvov, including the armored train, so I'm not discussing them here. So let's get to the fortress itself, which we are not supposed and will not be able to take over in this mission. It is smack in the middle of the town of Modlin. It's incredibly powerful. Think highly experienced 2x rate of fire Gustav gun powerful. And it's got a range of 5 hexes, so good luck avoiding it, which you will have to do throughout this mission. The objectives in the north don't present any particular challenges, so use your general tactics to take them over, but make sure you send some of your recons to the east, and I'll explain why. I also highly recommend destroying the Polish armored train early, because it'll be slightly more difficult to do it later. It can be a thorn in your side, and it's pretty easy to block and force to surrender. Once you approach the radius of death around Modlin, shift left and right towards Zakrochim and Nowy Dvor. One thing you can do to the enemy fortress is to blind it. The bunkers around the town provide the enemy with sight radius, and if you destroy them, which is pretty easy with decent artillery and bombers, you will prevent the nasty Modlin fortress from shooting into Zakrochim, which is comfortably within the death radius, and you have to take it. In the east, use your recons to squeeze in through the unguarded river crossing north of Nowy Dvor and wreak some havoc in there, destroying the AA and artillery emplacements. Once Zakrochim is yours, direct your main force south and east towards Kazunowy, and then Nowy Dvor should fall easily. I have very little to say about the Breslitovsk map, because it's pretty straightforward and the Poles aren't offering too much resistance, except maybe around Rudka, where you have to fight in the forests. There isn't gonna be too much Polish air force, they're on their last legs. The only interesting point that I can come up with is that you shouldn't go to Bialystok und Plum. The town is the focus of the Soviet attack happening in this area, and 100 prestige it provides is definitely not worth being bombarded by the Soviet artillery. But make sure you cover that river crossing in the east. You don't want to deal with stray BT-5s roaming about. Otherwise, advance south and southeast and just take all of the objectives. They're not that difficult. Alright, let's talk about the big end. With a huge map, the 50 turns long Warsaw scenario. Well, it's one of the biggest scenarios in the game. Full stop. It's up there with Stalingrad, and like Stalingrad, if you don't know what you're doing, it'll kick your ass. 50 turns might seem like a lot, but you can easily squander it pushing through enemy defenses and not even capture half of all those objectives, all of which are primary, mind you. You have to take all of them. So here's how I did it, in 41 turns. I think this map's biggest deception is this railway going around the city. The suggestion here is that you take one district, then you transport your units in trains to the other, etc, etc. But it doesn't work, because you have to break through the outer perimeter of the enemy defenses each time, and you don't have time for that. So given the fact that the Vistula River is the biggest obstacle in the city, and the enemy have lots of artillery and AA guns bunched up in the center of Warsaw, you really need to destroy all of them in one go. The trick is to send your troops on both the banks of the river, starting at the top left or at the bottom right corner of the map. Take lots of artillery and keep all of it close to the river. Bring a bridging engineer unit to follow your advance on the river so that your units can easily be transferred from one bank to the other, especially with artillery, and if your artillery is close to the river, the guns will be able to cover each other and help each other without even transferring to the other side. Then advance through the city districts along the river until you have taken all of the objectives, having to deal with only some of the static defenses the Poles have prepared. A few additional points about the battle in the city itself. Be extra careful when advancing on the western bank of the river, because the Poles have lots of mobile reserves there, and they will not hesitate to counterattack. The enemy have a strong air force presence in the area, plus they have many anti-air guns. So go into Moscow 41 mode and stock up on Bf-109s and 110s, AA guns and recon planes. The tributary of the Vistula in the east has marshy banks, and even with the bridge engineers deployed, many units, including pioneers and heavy infantry, will not be able to cross there. Keep that in mind. Oh, and finally, let's talk about spending commendation points in Warsaw, because you'll have two opportunities to do that. At the beginning of the mission, the game will ask you if you'd like to spend 8 points to look for a Soviet prototype plane, and if you do spend the points, you will get garbage, outdated Soviet and Polish planes, which are completely useless at this point. However, a few turns later, you will be asked to spend 4 more points to continue the search. And after that, on turn 9, you are supposed to get the famous IL-2 Sturmovik. I say supposed to because the game apparently glitched on me and I didn't get anything despite spending 12 CP. And the mission is a bit too long for me to try and replay it because of a glitch. But it seems to work for other people, so go for it. There are plenty of commendation points to go around in this DLC. And thus ends the short campaign in Poland, and we're offered an ahistorical but fun romp in Finland. The Errata Road scenario is such an obvious bonus level map that there isn't too much to talk about the strategy, but here are a few pointers. What happens if you combine a 15 strength heavy anti-air gun with a quick deployment trait? A major pain in the ass. Unless it's yours. So the Soviets have one in the middle of the map. It's one of the optional green units, and if you're not careful, it'll kill your tanks and ask for seconds. So when sending your mobile troops forward, protect them with artillery and don't get too cocky with captured units that you can't easily replace. Once the AA gun is in the range of your artillery, it's pretty easy to kill. Speaking of anti-air, the Soviets will have lots and lots of plane in here, so be prepared for that as well, and remember that all of the enemy planes belong to the red faction and that killing them adds to the red objective. Once you accomplish the red objective, the mission is over, regardless of whether you have completed the green or not. So don't rush killing everything in sight and try to encircle the green units somewhere. I prefer doing it between the river in the west and that lake east of it. Oh, and don't forget to plop your long-range heavy mortars on those hills. They're there for a reason. When you look at the map, Taipale looks like a pure defensive scenario, but it's more like a mixed meeting engagement kind of thing. Nevertheless, you'll get a taste of static defenses, as the objectives on your bank of the river in the west are perfect for that. Bring some infantry, bring some tanks, cover them with artillery, and those bridges are impenetrable. The situation in the east is slightly trickier though. Your bank of the river is pretty difficult to defend there, plus you don't have enough time to get to those locations before the Soviets come in. So my approach is to deploy my best tanks, my meanest infantry in the east, and cross the river and actively destroy the Soviet forces there. There will always be an initial Soviet attack to meet you in the area, so you have to deal with it first, but then it gets tricky because around every 5 turns there will be an attack randomly generated at one of the 3 points, in the east, in the center, in the west. You can't really predict which one it's gonna be, so my approach is to clear the area around Taipale first, leave a small contingent in that area, and then move my elite troops to the west to take the remaining 2 objectives on the other side of the river. If an attack occurs, and there will be 3 or 4 during your playthrough, use your attacking tanks as a fire brigade and counterattack in that particular area, which is much better than trying to defend everywhere. The Soviets also have a pretty strong presence in the air, and once you deal with the initial wave of enemy planes, there will be one strong enemy fighter coming with every additional attack. The Denmark mission takes place in 1940, and I call shenanigans on that, although the 1939 DLC in Panzer Corps 1 actually included Norway, and that was also in 1940. So, hush my mouth. Anyway, this is the last mission of the DLC, and to celebrate that, we get a little surprise. Regardless of whether you go to Finland or not, and once again, I don't know why you shouldn't, you get 35 units of mother-effing KV-2 tanks for just 5 commendation points. Do I even need to spell out how insanely powerful and advantageous it is? On the other hand, the poor Danes have no ships and no planes, so you don't have to worry about bringing any fighters or moving those troop transport through the straits. Well, except for the mines, obviously. You should worry about them. Otherwise, direct your main force, including the wonderful, delicious KV-2s, through the peninsula. Watch out for the motorcyclist recons, which can be a bit annoying, and a little counterattack about halfway around. The Danes have terrible tanks, so don't worry about it too much. It's slightly trickier on the islands, and you can do a few things to avoid losing too many troops. One, the Danes have a few pretty strong infantry units around Copenhagen, and they will not hesitate to use them in counterattacks if they see any weakness, even on the southern island. Two, you don't have to take Copenhagen. There are no objectives there, and even the objective closest to it, you only have to destroy the warehouse there, you don't have to take it. Three, once you have dealt with the southern island, don't be afraid of loading some of the units back into the ships and trying to outflank the Danes somewhere else. And 4, don't forget that you finally have access to paratroopers and half-tracks. Use them to your advantage here. But in any case, you're given plenty of time to deal with this mission, so never rush. It will never help you. Alright, now that we're done with all of the missions and the entire DLC, it's time to draw a few conclusions, and my overall impression is quite good. You can see there's growth in the quality of the scenarios compared to the previous DLC and the original campaign, so let's go through a few positive and negative points I'd like to mention. I hugely enjoyed the variety of the game. You get to play against many opponents in different areas, in different seasons, in different climatic conditions, which makes the DLC so much more memorable. And getting to the next point, why are there so many French missions in there? Because that battle was so small, etc, etc. I've noticed that the people who complained about that the most were people who hadn't tried the missions, because I've actually seen people changing their opinions to diametrically opposing ones once they've played the missions, because they're well done and highly enjoyable. So if you haven't tried the DLC, and if you're a little bit on the fence about the whole French thing and maybe unknown battles thing, well, don't worry about it. Next up, the writing in the briefings and the debriefings was quite good. By this point, Captain Wagner is a fleshed out character and is a joy to see. Plus, I really like the role that Capitana Anna plays in this DLC. Because Spain was neutral in that war, kinda sorta, and because the communication takes place via letters, Hannah is such a nice vehicle to talk about things that happen outside the fronts and theaters you happen to fight on. You get a taste of that in 1939 with the closure of borders between Spain and France and the war between France and Germany, and Anna cannot come to Germany, etc, etc. I see a lot of potential for more of that in future DLCs. As I mentioned before, for this DLC I decided to do a parallel playthrough without importing my core from Spain. It was on generalissimus level of difficulty and without any commander traits. And I must say that it was interesting, it was illuminating. Some of the aspects of missions actually changed because the enemy was more aggressive, but I've been able to go through the entire DLC with that arrangement. It's pretty tough, you often have to scrounge for prestige in weird ways, but it's possible, and I think it's a good challenge for experienced players. Now onto the negatives, and there are few, but the biggest one of them is the fact that the second half of the campaign feels a bit watered down. We've got Warsaw, of course, but it feels like a huge juicy steak which is surrounded by a few peas. The first half of the DLC is pretty intense, but most of the missions that come after the Basura are generally easy. We've got some challenge in modeling, a little bit, some challenge in typelay, obviously we've got this behemoth of Warsaw, but the rest are really easy and there's not much to talk about. It feels like there should have been at least one more moderately difficult scenario, maybe another scenario in Poland, or maybe making the Denmark scenario more complex, because I really enjoyed the idea of it, because you have to use naval landings, you have to use airborne landings, you have to combine many different things. This is what you really want in an enjoyable scenario, but Denmark was a bit too easy and you really don't have to exert yourself and try to think of something interesting and find new strategies to crack it. I know why they did it, the level of fighting you see in the campaign is ahistorical already, but still. Finally, why aren't there any Finns in the Finnish scenarios? I understand Errata Road, it's a little bonus level, but typically, you kind of expect the Finns to be manning the Mannerheim line, and it makes sense, especially if you think that the developers are actually experimenting with all of different factions, allied factions, enemy factions, and suddenly you don't get the Finns there, which baffles me. Anyway, this is it for this huge video and for this DLC, and if you like the stuff I do even a little bit, please do subscribe to my channel. I'd like to see more subscribers here, because I see people watching but I don't see many people staying here, so please subscribe. That will be a huge encouragement for me to keep making these videos. Also check out my Twitch channel, I'll leave the link in the description. I do retro gaming streams there every Thursday, so if you'd like to talk to me and listen to me unedited and unscripted, go ahead and join the streams. Cheers. And now a little joke to end this video. How does Heinz Guderian seduce a lobster? Pincer movements. No!